Welcome to Deep Thought. There are many forms of intelligence. Many forms of intelligence. You know what? I'm gonna tell you what. I'm not big on like so-called IQ tests because they do test one form of intelligence, logical, mathematical, and maybe reading ability. But and they are important. They are important. But it doesn't test everything. It doesn't test everything. I've always been a follower of that, well, they call it a theory, but I call it the reality of multiple intelligences. Because I've met people who would do well on an IQ test, but then they didn't have any street smarts, which is a form of intelligence in itself. In fact, I remember I was working on this one job, one of my 1,000 jobs. This one was in the government. Incidentally, I always say that because I have a consultation client. He loves when I say that. But I'm going to tell you what. And I remember, and this job had a bunch of attorneys on it. It had a bunch of attorneys. And I never forget what this woman said, who was an administrative assistant. She said, no, she don't have that education that they do, but she has a PhD in common sense. And I've met some people like that. Incidentally, and you know how I flow on here, 3 of the most successful people I've known in life had 8th grade educations. But, you know, they just used a different form of intelligence. You know, they didn't have that big old degree or something, but they were all 3 were very successful from what they were able to use. And, you know, if you really think about intelligence, my feeling is intelligence is whatever helps you get through life. And, you know, there's going to be many forms of intelligence. Everybody is not going to be the same. I mean, like one form is emotional intelligence. And there's a lot of talk about that. Like you have a lot of women who complain that they don't meet men who have that emotional intelligence because, you know, in general, women are more emotional than men. Notice I said in general, so don't be up here like you're a man, you more emotional. I said in general, because then you have some women you do have some women out here who thinking more logical. But the emotional intelligence is one thing. Because if you really think about it, when you're dealing with people out here, you're dealing with their emotions, men and women. Even though men aren't as, in general, emotionally intelligent as women, men still have emotions. And when you talk about street smarts or something like that, that's really emotional intelligence. It's knowing how to deal with people. Like, I had mentioned one time this dude who sold contraband goods in fresh air environments. And just get what that means. And I remember he said he would go through certain bad neighborhoods just so they would get used to his face. So there was no problem when he go through and he had to take care of some business. That's a form of intelligence right there. That was very smart. You know, or a form of intelligence. And in fact, you have some IQ tests that test this, just seeing patterns. And maybe it could be patterns in people, in events, whatever. You could see somebody, they could say, okay, this is coming because this is what is happening. Seeing that pattern, that's a form of intelligence. A form of intelligence was called kinesthetic intelligence. Kinesthetic, physical. Like you have some of these athletes out here, they consider to be physical. They can just handle stuff. They can take care of stuff. Maybe they can play that sport well. They're physically gifted. But that's a form of intelligence anyway. And also really controlling your body anyway, because let's look at that deeper. Let's look at that part deeper. Communication is only 10% verbal. And I'm really just rounding that up. People have put it at like 9%, 8%. But let's just say it's 10% verbal. That means you're still communicating with somebody. Now, what if somebody's real intelligent of their own body language and what they're giving to people, what they're showing? In fact, you have some people, unfortunately, they could tell a blatant lie and pass a lie detector test, because all the lie detector test does is test someone's reactions. But if they real calm and say, I'm from the planet Silica, and they believe it, they'll pass that test. In fact, someone has said that at the very least, somebody who's giving people lie detector tests, they say, well, at least they believe this. As long as they believe it, that's all that matters. You know, you might have somebody who has musical intelligence. Somebody who could, I knew a young man, and he was a fun person, but he could play the piano just by ear. He never took a formal course. All he did was just listen to somebody else playing the piano, and he did it himself. That's a form of intelligence. It comes out in different ways, and of course, there's always a mix of it. And I mentioned this before. I remember it was a guy who purchased foreclosed homes. Would fix them, clean them up, and sell them, make some money. But I remember talking with him one time, but he also had this guy who wouldn't seem as educated or have as much money, but who did the cleaning for him. And how the guy with the money, the guy who would get the foreclosed properties, the guy who had all of this intelligence, you know, what people would consider intelligence, the educational background and everything, he was listening to this guy who could clean up. But see, this guy had an intelligence. That's an intelligence, knowing how to clean stuff, how to do certain work. Is many forms of it. It depends on what someone is doing in life. It depends on their thing. Like, I'll use the street smart example. You have many people, they might not have that education, that formal education, but they're real street smart. Like I said, I've known three, not just one, but three people who had 8th grade educations, yet they had money like crazy. They had money like crazy. They were doing well. They knew something. In fact, it was one of them who had an 8th grade education. And I never forget what he told me. May he rest in peace. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. But I never forget what he told me one time. He was like, Ron, forget all these newspapers. If you want to know anything politically, whatever, read the Wall Street Journal. Read the finances. That'll tell you everything that you need to know. And this guy had a Swiss bank account. This guy with an 8th grade education had a Swiss bank account. Was living in a home that he did not pay a mortgage for. This dude had money. And in fact, this same dude, he was working on what would be considered a menial job. But I saw the way he was running stuff on that job, we thought it was his place. I'm gonna tell you what, there are many forms of intelligence. Always know that. So, and I'll get back into that intelligence in the next episode, but just understand that these tests out here, these IQ tests, they test a legitimate form, but there's some forms that might not be tested. Like, I'm not familiar with any test that test someone's street smarts. In fact, something like that, you can't really test it. You gotta just say, hey, are they smart enough just to show their face in certain neighborhoods so they're not bothered? Okay. So anyway, that's all I have for today. Think on this, and I'll get back with you. Peace and blessings.